don't have to worry about any premium or discount issues. The 24/7 access thing that Matt mentioned, and then the fee on it is less also, which is always nice, and it's more diversified. I don't know if I said that yet or not, but yeah.
Great, thank you, Kirby. So with that, now that we understand a little bit about Arbor Digital, why we exist on top of or underneath the umbrella of Arbor Capital to bring this value to you, let's kind of start going into the first piece. So the first thing I'd like to do with everyone today was for you to kind of take yourself out. So I'm going to describe a few different types of clients. So what we've learned over the last year is we've seen 4 different crypto clients. One is the crypto apathetic, all the way on the left side. And what that means exactly probably what you think it means. You don't really paying attention to it. You haven't really engaged. You don't have a viewing of it, good or bad. You just really don't pay attention to it and don't care to. So if you're that, then you're probably on that side. Going further across the spectrum, you have your crypto curious. Those are the people who, may have heard about it, seen an article or two in a newspaper, or maybe the Wall Street Journal, or maybe you've gotten something from your advisor at Arbor, to now you're kind of curious about it. And I'm guessing there's a lot of you that are curious if you're here today. But that's kind of what the crypto curious client is. And then as we move further along, we have the crypto investor. So the crypto investor is kind of that person who was willing to take a risk and just kind of dive in and throw some money into an investment in crypto, whether that be through us and our GBTC in the alternative section, or you've done it on your own, or you have a family member or friend or colleague who maybe has come to you and says, I do this, maybe you should too. And maybe just as a side thing, as maybe a gambling money or very speculative, you open up an account somewhere and you put some money to work, maybe at Coinbase or at Gemini. But the idea is that you've actually taken the time to maybe go on to that and actually start investing. The last one, all the way on the right, is kind of the crypto native. And that person is one that's kind of knee deep in the crypto space. They understand what blockchain is. They understand what cryptocurrency and crypto assets are. They maybe even work in the space, maybe developing, or they're just really educated, maybe since 2015 or 2012, or just some time frame that they've been engaged in learning about all of these new technologies and how they're changing the landscape in many, many different ways. So
Mark, I think it's important to point out too here that there's no right or wrong client type when it comes to having the conversations with your advisor about your perspectives or your questions or your curiosity. It's about whatever box you fit in so that your advisor can really help to service your needs.
Well said, Michelle. Absolutely. And that's why we're here. We are not here to judge or say anything about where you are in the crypto spectrum, but one of our duties as your advisor is to understand where you are, so that way we know how to service you best, as Michelle just pointed out. So Michelle, thank you so much for jumping in. So what I'd like for you all to do is in the chat, please, which crypto type of client are you right now? Which one do you resonate with on that spectrum? And I'd love to see some of the answers. And I'll put in where I am. And make sure that when you're in your chat, I should have mentioned this at the beginning, you should have a little drop down box at the bottom that where you can click either to host or panelist or to chat with everyone. So please do everyone if you are comfortable sharing, and if not, just do to host and panelists. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of curious ones come in. What are you all seeing? Oh, and I like it. Midway between curious and investor. Yes, you can absolutely be in between, maybe even overlap as well. Great. Get a couple more. Okay, so we've got the majority here as crypto curious, which obviously if you're joining something like this, yeah, you got to be a little curious. So thank you all for sharing. And now we'll get back to the regularly scheduled programming. So now that we've done that, let's now start going over the basics. So first, what is the blockchain? In a very simple way, blockchains are a type of database, or another word that people are comfortable with, a ledger, which is shared amongst the nodes of a computer network. Just like how over the internet, there are nodes that make the internet go. Now, what's important to understand is that all financial accounts are tracked using ledgers. Ledgers contain the identity of the owner. Ledgers track the history of credit, debit, deposits, or withdrawals used to determine the current balance. And then you have your traditional ledgers at the current banks or brokers that are centralized and permissioned. Or in other words, they are private and closed. Matt, Kirby, Michelle, did I miss anything with blockchain? How would you describe what a blockchain is?
I think it's, yeah, at the basic level, you explained it spot on. And I would also add that we use the term blockchain. Another phrase that gets used that it's similar is distributed ledger technology. That's something that is also used out there. Some are blockchain, some aren't. But if you hear that, start thinking that you're probably going to be hearing about blockchains as well. The last point, well, a couple things there. What is in the ledger? It's the identity of the owner, of who owns the assets. It's all of it keeps track of all of the debits and credits for the lifetime. And that's what's so cool about this. It's transparent and auditable. The last bullet point there is something to think about with, there are permissionless, if you hear those words like permissionless and accessible and decentralized, those are all versions of open sourced blockchains, right? But there are also some that are permissioned or closed off or centralized. And that's not what we are investing in for you. I just want to make that clear, right? We are investing in the open and the traditional ones. And so I just wanted to kind of differentiate the two, because it does get lost occasionally. What is the difference between a permission private blockchain and an open permissionless blockchain?
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And I appreciate you diving into that. And actually, when we get to the next few slides, and so that's where Matt is already kind of teeing up what the next slides are going to be about when it comes to blockchain. But that's where I think we kind of put it out this way, because I know the word blockchain can mean many different things to many different people, or it actually could be this word that is kind of scary. It's this new way to access a database or a ledger. And the truth is, the reality is we're already in everyday life and everyday business, ledgers or databases are used every single day. And the easiest way to think about a blockchain is just an evolution of your basic ledger or your basic database. And so there are traditional companies who utilize blockchain, and we like to call that blockchain for business, as Matt just mentioned. So you have companies like IBM. They use their own private closed blockchain to work with other companies for their supply chain. They are testing this. And I think Josh is going to go through some of this a little bit later, so I won't tell any more of that. But I think another example would be JP Morgan and their Onyx program. So some people may have heard or may not have heard, but JP Morgan is experimenting with their own private internal blockchain to transact and keep their database or their ledger, as opposed to the old system that they've been using for the last 30, 50, 60 years. So there are different versions. And so we just wanted to start off with the basic premise of a blockchain. And if you're going to take anything away from this slide, it's that it's a database or a ledger using this new technology of cryptography and the nodes of a computer network. So with that, Matt, you've already kind of teed us up, so thank you. Now let's go into what's a decentralized blockchain. A decentralized blockchain is distributed databases or ledgers, which are shared amongst the nodes of an open computer network. So in the JP Morgan example I used before, that's a closed computer network. So only JP Morgan computers and everything can access that database, change the database, or input data into that database. The big difference here is these decentralized ones are completely open, and as Matt mentioned, these two words, open and permissionless. So decentralized, how they differ are decentralized and permissionless are, in other words, are public and open. So what does that mean? Public means anyone can use or access it. Anyone can maintain it. Anyone can work on it. The other word is open. Anyone can come in and verify or audit the transactions or the pieces on the ledger. Copies of the ledger are maintained globally rather than by one single counterparty, such as a company. And it's a very important distinguish because JP Morgan does operate on a global scale, but still operate fully within its own four walls. And whereas a decentralized blockchain is completely open to the world, which I know could be a little scary. The third piece is transparency. So you heard Matt already mention this too. So no one needs a password to view the ledger. No one needs permission from anybody else to get access to it. It just lives and breathes out on the internet, and it's fully transparent. If it goes onto the blockchain or if it goes onto the ledger, then it's completely viewable and it can't be changed. So again, I'd like to invite Kirby, Michelle, Matt to add anything here on a decentralized blockchain.
Just add the most important piece, Mark, is that it's open. Anybody in the world with an internet connection can access these blockchains. That's what's so compelling. You don't need anyone's permission. You don't need a bank's permission. You don't need a government's permission. You just can go online and access these. And that's what makes them so compelling and so powerful. That's at the base layer. Then what they're doing on top of it, we'll get into later.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also important to point out that the transparency portion of this is what makes it such a powerful tool. The transparency makes it so that you can't, to steal a coin, you can't cheat the chain. So if somebody tries to pass off a transaction that never actually took place, or they tried to do a double spend, because everybody can see that Alice only had 2 coins and Alice has already sent those 2 coins to Bob, she can't send 2 coins to somebody else. So the transparency is what keeps everybody honest on the blockchain. And as much as we talk about how you can see who owns what, there's still a level of anonymity to it. And that might be something that gets touched on later, but I think that's also important to point out.
Yeah. And Michelle, you use this word honesty, and I think it's a very important word. And I think that lends to the other word that we use a lot within our financial system is this word trust. You know, just like how you all trust us to help you with your life goals and helping you invest and achieve those goals through the wealth management strategies we employ. Now, with our traditional system, there is this level of honesty and trust that we put into that system to utilize it. And so an example of how the system can be misused and how trust can be destroyed, and I think everyone would be familiar with this example, is Enron. Does everyone remember what happened with Enron? Basically, I think the phrase that everyone gets comfortable with using is that there was cooking of the books. So a fundamental issue with our ledger system or our databases is that they can be changed by these central authorities or these private companies or these decision makers, and no one would be of the wiser. And we've seen that manifest in the real world in pretty drastic ways, and Enron is one of those examples. And so Enron is actually a good case study for how blockchain probably could have saved a lot of those issues that were boiling and going from a systematic pace well before anything actually came to light. And that's where we have to have trust and have this honesty around how we keep ledgers and databases. And so that's where being able to verify and audit by anybody is a very important piece to establish that honesty and trust. So that leads me into what are the goals of the blockchain? So we've already talked about some of those already. Transparent and auditable. So what does that mean? That means anyone can see it. You guys have already heard it, and anyone can go in and verify. So if I do a transaction with Matt and Michelle wants to go and verify that, she doesn't need permission for anybody to do that. As a third party anonymous, but we don't even have to know it's Michelle. She can go verify and audit that on her own. I think the second piece, which is really important, is secure, and this word of immutable. So Matt, Matt or Kirby, I'd like you to kind of jump in. What does it mean for something to be immutable?
In the case of a block, oh, go ahead, Kirby.
Well, I was just gonna say, yeah, in the blockchain scenario, it's just once it's in the code, it can't be, or in the blockchain, it can't be changed. It's there, and everybody can view it, everybody can see it.
Well said. Can't be
Matt's probably
changed.
got more to add than that, but
No, that's good. My dog's barking in the background, so I'm going to keep staying mute for a minute.
No, Kirby, you nailed it. And I think the easiest phrase to understand there is just it can't be changed. The third piece is faster settlement. So with these blockchain networks operating, they operate 24/7 and they operate all the time, 365. That means they operate in real time. So if you put a transaction through, now it may take a few minutes, and in the blockchain world, a few minutes is very slow. The settlement is near instantaneous. And especially we live in a global world where businesses transaction over the internet. And Matt, you have a saying, and I know Kirby and Michelle, you guys also talk about this a lot, is that we've been able to communicate instantaneously, globally over the internet for years now. What blockchain enables now is for us to transmit information and data in real time over the internet utilizing blockchain. The fourth thing up on this list is scalability. So being able to do a lot and increase the amount of data, the amount of transactions on a blockchain is very important. And we're going to get into one of the myths where it talks about energy usage, specifically with Bitcoin. So we'll save that for later. The third, which is one of the issue, or I don't know if it's an issue, but one of the efficiencies that can be achieved is this reduction of cost by eliminating intermediaries. So what is an intermediary? Basically, the banks and the brokers, so your Charles Schwab's, your JP Morgan's, your Bank of America's, they act as intermediaries between parties who want to get involved in a financial transaction. So if I want to go lend out some money to Matt, I'd have to go put some money into Bank of America or another bank or institution, and then I can't go directly lend straight to Matt. I then put it there, and then Matt would also then have to go to that bank and then ask them to lend, and they could go for me. And there's obviously a lot of benefits to operating under this model. But at the cost, what we're seeing is this trust and honesty. And then what this does is it reduces the cost. We know it's very expensive. So I wanted to jump in there because I know there's a lot of thoughts on the panel here. Anything you guys would add in terms of the reduction of cost of intermediaries?
I actually want to kind of throw something out there just to take the blockchain to maybe a more less financial level and a more day-to-day level. So, or at least something that I think a lot of people might be able to relate to. When you talk about intermediaries, if you've purchased a home, you do a title search. And sometimes that can take 30 days, cost $3,000, $5,000, $7,000, depending on where you're at and how much they're doing for you. So there's this idea that real estate can live on the blockchain. And when you purchase real estate, you could buy a home and that title would live on a blockchain, and that record that you have a home loan through Charles Schwab on property 1234 Main Street, and Matt Klesky owns that home. And if you want to sell that property because that title lives on a blockchain, the individual that wants to purchase it would then record the transaction that for $100,000 property at 1234 Main Street purchased from Matt Kolesky with $50,000 of a loan on it to Charles Schwab was transferred to Kirby Houchin, and the Schwab loan was paid off on it, so it's free and clear. You're removing the need to have the title company do their searches. You're removing the need to worry about the liens and anything else, property taxes. All of that stuff can be attached to the blockchain so that everybody can view that. There is a level of anonymity that you lose on certain aspects of it, because you might not know who owns 1234 Main Street, because there might be a hash or a hidden value assigned to it, but you're going to know the property. But if you're going to buy the property, you're getting everything up front. It's all validated that this is the real information that's associated with that piece of property. And so there's no need for the title search. It removes that intermediary between it. And I think that for most of the people that I talk to, that's a very great explanation, because it's kind of a day-to-day normality that you're moving from an intermediary need to a blockchain chain process.
Well said, Michelle. I think everyone can resonate with that scenario that you just put up. And it lends really nicely, especially to the last piece on here, which is peer-to-peer. And really what that means is I don't have to go through an intermediary anymore. So in Michelle, your example, does that mean then instead of, let's say if you wanted to sell me 1234 Main Street, that we wouldn't have to go to somebody in between to do that transaction?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Peer-to-peer.
Wonderful.
Matt, before you move on, I just want to jump in here real quick. That heading there, what are the goals of blockchain? Part of where blockchain technology got developed, where the genesis of it was, is the 2008 housing and finance crisis. Many of you may have lost homes or known family members or friends that lost homes, lost jobs. And that whole crisis, there was an element of trust lost with people. The auditing firms, the banking institutions, the people that we trusted to keep track of the value in these assets for us didn't do a very good job. And so the people that created this blockchain technology after that, they looked at this and said, how can we do this where we don't have to trust these other people, where we can have it be transparent so people can know what's going on? And they created this software to fix the problems of the Great Recession. And once that software, once that technology is developed, people are finding uses for it in all kinds of different areas, whether that's real estate or whether that's tracking of global equipment. There's a million use cases, but it all stems from this goal of how do we make this transparent and audible so we don't repeat the past failures that we've had. And so that means we want it to be peer-to-peer. We want it to be globally accessible. And so just on a tangible level for everyone, I think we can remember what happens when we have not transparent systems and you get people that don't do what they're supposed to do, and that the shock to the whole world and the economy and what that can do to your personal finance. And so this is where the aspirational goal of this technology is to help solve these issues, and how that gets used over the next few decades remains to be seen. But that's where the goal stems from.
Very well said, Josh. And I can't think of anything else to, I don't even want to add anything else to that after that, other than just to close out the blockchain section to review a little bit now how we've gone over. And there are four main types of blockchain, if you will, that we've kind of gone over, or a few that we've gone over, but here are a couple extra. So the first one we kind of went over are these decentralized public blockchains. Then we started off with the private blockchains in that very first slide. So you have these two other ones, and these are kind of newer. They're still kind of in development. You have these consortium blockchains where maybe it's not one centralized authority, but maybe there's two or three or maybe four, but it's capped, or it's meant to be of a consortium of sorts. And then you have these hybrid blockchains that are utilizing some elements of decentralization and some elements of privatization or centralization. We just are starting to see different versions of blockchain come to be in the industry now, to where there isn't just one blockchain. And this is something that's evolving over time. And we put this up here purposely because it takes a full-time job to actually understand and stay in this space and keep up with it as it's changing and rapidly evolving every day. And that's why we take on that work for y'all, and to be sure that we are at the forefront. So now moving on to the second segment of our presentation here today, to really have a discussion around what is cryptocurrency. And I actually want to make sure that we don't have any questions or chats coming in, but I don't see anything yet. So what is cryptocurrency? So one of the failures, I will say, of the industry so far is that Bitcoin became so popular as a cryptocurrency, and the word cryptocurrency was adopted so fast that we actually all then decided to describe every single crypto asset as a cryptocurrency. So that false narrative got put out very, very early. And so that's one of the things for today we'd like you to leave this with, is that not all crypto are cryptocurrencies, and that cryptocurrency is one form of crypto asset. So where does crypto come from? Crypto in cryptocurrency comes from the cryptography used to encrypt and secure the network. So we've gone over that blockchain is the database. Cryptocurrencies, or these crypto assets, are the medium of exchange that live on top of these public decentralized networks. And so, as I just mentioned, they are only cryptocurrencies are one type. Crypto assets there are many different types of crypto assets. So one use case can be used for governance. So how do we govern the Bitcoin? Who makes changes? Who decides what makes change? If it's open and permissionless and anyone can participate, we have to have some form of governance. So owning a token or a coin can give you access and grant you power to help govern how the network is used. The third is, I'm sure everyone may have already heard, but if you haven't, another popular crypto asset that's not a cryptocurrency is what's called a non-fungible token, or an NFT, which NFTs have made all the headlines, as I'm sure many of you have seen. So that leads us to Bitcoin. So what is Bitcoin? The Bitcoin network, capital B, was the first ever decentralized distributed blockchain network, and the Bitcoin cryptocurrency was the first ever crypto asset. And again, the one thing to take away from that is that there is Bitcoin, big B, the database and the network, and then there's Bitcoin, little b, that one is the asset. And so the Bitcoin blockchain is that peer-to-peer electronic cash system. That was its tagline. The white paper, as Josh mentioned already, that was released on October 31st, 2008, just after the financial crisis, has been operating since then. Now, what the main function of the Bitcoin network, not the cryptocurrency, the network is a payment system based on cryptographic proof, rather than the trust of an intermediary or centralized authority. And the main use of Bitcoin, the asset, is that means to transfer value and utilize a medium of exchange at the speed of the internet. So I know I just went over a lot there. I hope I was able to do this at a fundamental level, but I'd like to now let Matt, Kirby, and the rest of the panelists maybe jump in with some thoughts on what is Bitcoin. Matt, why don't you go first?
Yeah, so the one thing that I would add there, and Michelle touched on this before, and there's this idea, and we've heard these terms, trustless, right? So it's not trust, you're trusting the code, you're trusting the Bitcoin code instead of a bank or an intermediary. As we've seen here, right, the white paper was published almost 14 years ago. The network was up and running a couple of months after that. So the Bitcoin network's been around for almost 13 years. So when people say, oh, it's a fad, it's going away, it's not, right? It's been around that long, and it's literally the most secure network in the world. So when you think about value propositions, not just digital gold or digital cash, the most secure network in the world, more secure than Amazon's servers, more secure than Apple, more secure than your iPhotos living in the cloud, right? That's another place where I think the tremendous value of what this network is yet to even be realized. Right? Just because I wanted to just kind of put that out there, because it's pretty compelling when we think about everything that's built on the internet and the value that's getting transferred around. It's pretty compelling. And the other point, Mark, which you already brought up, it's like, we can exchange information, emails, and text nearly instantaneously worldwide, but we still can't transfer money worldwide. We can PayPal and Venmo, but that still takes days to settle. If you do it on a Friday, it's going to settle, the next Tuesday or Wednesday. So this literally is a way to transact value in a secure way over the internet nearly instantaneously.
Absolutely. Anything else anyone else would like to add?
Yeah, I was just going to touch base there that Matt said more secure than the iCloud, more secure than a lot of these other areas, but it's even beyond that. In 2014, the US government's servers were hacked and all the top secret clearance information from Office of Personnel Management was pulled out. So it's really more secure than the US government's own files and records, their own secure private networks.
I think it's also important to point out with everybody discussing the security of the ledger, the security of Bitcoin. And I know some people have to be thinking, well, we have supercomputers, we have different levels of computational skill sets that are consistently being developed. And the truth is that for every one bad actor that is an extremely intelligent person and chooses to put all that intelligence to bad use, we have another individual on the good side acting as what you would call a white hat hacker. They are consistently developing what they would call the SHA, SHA 256, which is the hash. It's really the cryptography that goes into the chains and goes into the secure transfer of these transactions. And so I've sat through countless seminars with very intense debates about whether or not we're ever going to have a supercomputer that's going to craft a SHA 256. And the answer is sure, eventually we will. But by the time that occurs, there will be another greater, stronger cryptography that's developed, and the chains will migrate to that. So I just want to put that out there that while it is a very real fact that the security landscape evolves constantly, it's also a very real fact that for every time we or the bad actor makes a step forward, security itself makes a step forward. So there is a level of safety within the group that you get within the ledger system.
Thank you, Michelle, so much for jumping in with that. Very important pieces to the security of blockchain and Bitcoin. But we do have a question coming in. I'd love to answer right now because it does speak to kind of what we're talking about. So the question is, who actually owns the blockchains? And so the very easy answer on this is that everyone who uses it owns it. So that's what it means to be decentralized. So it's decentralized in its ownership. So one thing that we won't get on with this one, but maybe in the next part of our education series, is this idea of what's called a consensus mechanism. So that one of those consensus mechanisms is called proof of work. And what is consensus? Consensus is very simply how, if we're thinking just very, very on a basic level, it's how if Michelle and I go into an agreement, how do we reach a consensus on what is actually factually true? So basically, for a blockchain to be verified or audited and to reach consensus, there is this mechanism called proof of work. And so Michelle was just mentioning something called hashing. And again, this goes way more into the technical side. But basically, everyone who operates on the blockchain or actively engages with that blockchain can take ownership of that blockchain. And no one person or entity can.
Mark, I think at a really high level, an easy non-technical way to think about this is like a co-op or a federal credit union. The members themselves are the owners. So when you use the service, some of the fees and what the cost of what you're doing helps pay for the operation of it. And then when there's a profit, you get a portion of that as a member. And so on a very non-technical, that's kind of way to think about it. When you utilize the blockchain, you're part of the co-op or the credit union. You're a member owner.
It's a great way to put it, Josh. Thank you. So again, I'm a visual person. I know some people are visual as well. We've talked a lot about trust and these intermediaries, and a very easy way to visualize this is what the traditional, we call it the privacy model, is where we have the identities, so us, and then we have transactions. They then go to this trusted third party, and then there's a counterparty, and then there's this wall to the public. Underneath, blockchain brings this new privacy model where there's identities, and where Michelle's brought off that where it's kind of pseudonymous or anonymous to a certain point. The identities are walled off and all the transactions are public with no trusted third party or counterparties. And this is just a very simple, easy way to hopefully visualize the difference between what we do traditionally versus what is being utilized with these blockchains. So that brings us to the end of blockchains, cryptocurrency. We did a very, very basic rundown, but there is so much more to this space. And we hope we are going to be bringing more educational content to everyone here on this call. So we hope you continue to join us on these. But so I put into some buzzwords here. So Ethereum or Web 3.0, NFTs, metaverse, decentralized finance, all these buzzwords that happen in maybe all the headlines that you may be reading, we are going to bring to you all hopefully over the next few months. But some of the key takeaways before we get into some of the myths is just to know that there's centralized versus decentralized blockchains. There's cryptocurrency versus crypto assets, another term that's used are digital assets. One is the blockchain is a network or a ledger or a database, and the assets are native to that network. So with that being said, I'd love to start diving into some of the myths. And this is where I'm going to turn it over to Josh. Josh, take it away.
Thanks, Mark. I love that slide you showed earlier of the adoption scale, the 4 scales in there. In the last 12 years, I've kind of went through at least the first 3 of those 4 steps. And so for some of those that are working their way down this, we hear a lot of these myths as we're in that crypto curious stage. We're trying to figure out what this is. So the first myth we want to talk about is Bitcoin is bad for the environment. It uses too much energy. We've all heard that. At one time, Elon Musk even said he wasn't going to accept Bitcoin as payment on his vehicles anymore because it was bad for the environment. So is this true? So it does use 110 terawatt hours per year. That sounds like a lot to me. What does that mean? Well, it's 0.5% of the global electricity production. Okay, well, that still sounds like a lot if it's not useful. What can we compare that to? It's about the same number as a country like Sweden. But on the other hand, it's also a little bit less than the amount of electricity your laptop or your cell phone or any of these other devices use when they're plugged in and they're not being used, they're not powered up, just the standby electricity. So the sort of the wasted electricity of the world is more than what Bitcoin uses. So is this a worthwhile endeavor? These are hard numbers to figure out. So maybe the easiest comparison is to compare it to what it might replace. Bitcoin is a payment system, so it would hopefully replace some of the traditional finance. If you look at the US alone, there's over 470,000 ATMs. So when you calculate the ATMs and the branches of all the different banks in the US alone, what we come to figure out is that traditional finance estimates say uses about 5 times the amount of energy that Bitcoin does. So if Bitcoin actually replaced some portion of traditional finance, it may actually be a net positive for less energy use in the world. So we can't actually say it's bad for the environment. It may actually be good for it It depends on whether or not it gets used and fills that role. So this is an overly simplistic, and so we're going to call this a myth because it's actually fairly energy efficient for what it's trying to do. Next slide, please.
Josh, can I just add to that real quick? There's been a lot of
Absolutely.
studies. So this is actually kind of flipping it and looking at the other angle. There's some studies that show over half, and one of them was from 2019, almost 70% of Bitcoin's energy consumption comes from renewables. And if you think about how the energy grid works, it's very fragmented, especially here in the US, where there's flaring of natural gas. So there's times where one region has more energy and the other one has less. Bitcoin can help stabilize that and actually make the energy grid more efficient. Not just, and I love your comparison to TradFi, but when you look at even just the amount of green energy that's going into this, and it's actually helping the green energy renewables expand and provide a good platform to build up besides just kind of government subsidization of it.
You're absolutely right. And I was kind of simplifying it for the sake of time, but it's even a little bit, that's huge what you just brought up, but it's even more than that. So in an open letter released to the EPA, Jack Dorsey, the head of Twitter, and a whole bunch of other different executives who are big in the crypto space and the blockchain technology, they sent a letter explaining some of these issues. And one of the things they highlighted is the Bitcoin mining centers that process this are just computer systems. And so in periods of low activity where there isn't as much Bitcoin mining needed, they take that, many of those companies take that computer power and they use it to do things for gaming or for photo design. So they're simply data centers that at times are processing Bitcoin transactions, and at other times they're processing other useful data processing things for our global economy. So it's really actually a more efficient way to run the traditional finance. That ATM is powered on and is using energy all the time, and it's doing nothing else. This is actually a much more net positive to the environment in many different ways. And there's just so much, a limited amount of time here to get into it, but this really is a myth.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. And we actually do have a question that has come in that I think this lends nicely to is, the question is, any concerns if the grid goes down? Is it stored and can be recovered, or do we even know? I would like to jump in, but Matt, I'm going to give you an opportunity here to answer this question.
Yeah, well, if the US grid goes down, that's the beautiful thing about Bitcoin. It's a distributed ledger and distributed across the entire world. So when I think about the risk, right, the entire global internet would have to go down for the transactions to stop, which when you turn it back on, they would just kick back on. If you think about the attack vectors, that's one, it's highly, highly, highly unlikely. But even then, you're still not erasing the data that still exists on so as soon as you flip it back on, everybody already has the most recent data, and that's just going to sync right back up and turn on. That's the beauty of this. So whether there's regional power outages where a grid goes down in the world, not a big deal at all for Bitcoin. Now I won't get into different consensus mechanisms, but yeah, for Bitcoin, yeah, very not a non-issue, but good question.
Thank you, Matt. So Josh, we have about 5 minutes left, and I know we've got 2 myths. So let's go quickly with these next 2 myths.
Yep, so we'll just highlight the top here. Myth is just that digital currencies are used for scams. They're used for illicit activity, all kinds of criminal activity. And this is partially true, actually. They really are. But what people forget is, so is the US dollar, so is any sort of system. And so the RAND Corporation did a study, and they found that 99% of crypto transactions are performed through through centralized exchanges, which are subject to the same sort of anti-money laundering regulations that traditional bank have. And the UN has estimated that 2.7% of global GDP in traditional finance is illicit activity. And
Josh, can you put that into a number? What's 2.7% of global GDP?
It's huge. It's huge. I mean, we're talking trillions of dollars. It's more than the entire amount of money invested into digital assets and blockchain technology. Whereas in the blockchain technology or the digital currencies or cryptocurrencies, we're looking at only 0.01% of crypto transactions in 2020 were used for illicit activity. So is it used for scams? Absolutely. But it's a tiny fragment. It's not even 0.5%. It's closer to 1/3. So this is a myth. It's not more problematic than traditional finance.
And real quick, Josh, I'll jump in, right? If you're looking at traditional finance, right, there's entire divisions in banks that were set up to run illicit, funds for drug lords and, people in nefarious parts of the world. There's a quick question that came in on Bitcoin mining. What is Bitcoin mining? And since we didn't really talk about that, I'll give you the 20 seconds. Is Bitcoin mining is the energy that computers and servers use to validate the network, all of the transactions that are coming in. And so when Josh is talking about mining companies and mining, that's it's using energy, that energy is going to the computational power that's used to secure the network. That's what mining is. And so you can mine with a computer, you can mine with a server, you can, corporations are building whole, warehouses full of servers that are doing mining. And they're the ones, when Mark mentioned nodes, kind of you can think of some miners as nodes as well as people that are connecting it. That's what's securing the network itself.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you, Josh, for going through those last, kind of combining those last two myths so that we can get through that. And I guess I'll add just a couple quick things. So first is on the security side and the illicit activity. So one thing that has been very clear, especially given what we've been experiencing throughout the world, is that blockchain and crypto is not a good spot if you want to do illicit activity, because it's all transparent and auditable and verifiable. And when you have a global workforce who are incentivized to find those illicit activities, it really decentivizes any type of illicit activity. So it's actually projected that it's either going to continue to stay flat, or it's actually going to decrease that level of activity, even though it's already so small, because you can't hide at all in this space. And we actually probably should do, and I think that's where Michelle can kind of bring this to light a little bit more too, is we can do a full one on just the simple security mechanisms of that blockchain bring. And then we can go deeper into Bitcoin mining or proof of work and consensus mechanisms. But we are at the top of the hour. I want to thank everybody for sharing your questions and going through with us. Please, we want to leave this with a call to action. If you want to learn more, or you want to understand how this may benefit you in terms of an investment, please reach out to your advisor. So reach out to them directly through phone, email, and then we have, let me get to this slide here. Visit us off a website. We call it Get Off Zero. A lot of you are already probably invested, but we are always open, and we want to make sure that we are supporting you if you want to learn more about this space. And we will bring webinars like this to you proactively, but happy to hop on a phone call if you guys want to learn more in a more intimate setting. So with that being said, panelists, thank you so much today for joining me, for adding everything that you did. Everyone who attended, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for your trust in us to help you deliver and achieve your goals. We work hard every day to do that for you and your families all the time. So with that, we'll see you again soon. And thank you again for joining. Bye, everybody.